Exactly. So let's kick this off at CES. I think these were all at CES. I'm not sure, but NVIDIA certainly shook it up a little bit. I always find it curious. I actually almost went to CES this year. I've never been. Well, I think I went one like 20 years ago, but I've never been sort of recently, and it's always this really interesting dynamic. It is ostensibly a consumer tech show. So, by rights, you would think, well, there's no reason for people like us to go. And yet, you always get this sort of smattering of announcements that either are directly enterprise related or have this sort of tangential element to it. And so certainly some of that was out of NVIDIA kind of making some noise around it. And so they were probably the most active this week, I would guess, I would say, as far as announcements. So I guess you can cue us up of what struck you out of CS from them.
Yeah, so I've been to CES a few times, especially when I was doing more work around mobile devices and video systems, back when that was still much more groundbreaking than it is now. And the consumer tech was really leading the way. And I think part of the challenge for people like us going in recent years is that it's felt like it's a lot about smart refrigerators and cars. And, those things are cool, but not necessarily things that we would really care about from an IT perspective. But this time around, I think one of the things that really stuck out, as you said, was how pervasive NVIDIA was here. They had already had an in for CES because of their video game business, but now they're just talking straight up about their AI capabilities. And I think the one announcement that got my attention most, out of several important ones here, was around their Project Digits project, their new desktop, basically supercomputer that allows you to be able to work with AI at your desk without having to go into the cloud and being able to develop, work with the NVIDIA software stack. They're selling this computer for something like $3,000 as a starting point, which I think as an IT department, that's a no-brainer. Like if you don't have one of these on your desk, you're not really thinking about AI at this point. Even for very small companies, this is a price point that is obviously very approachable for the CIO office.
It was shocking on a bunch of different levels from my standpoint. The first is it speaks to, we've talked about before how expensive it is to build and train and the inference of these. And this is clearly targeted at developers, right, that are needing to build these AI-driven apps and need that sort of horsepower to do it. So if you were questioning whether or not that really was an issue, it clearly is, and this product I think speaks to that need. I'm also just beyond shocked at the price point. I mean, it is, to your point. I mean, it's just ridiculously low. I mean, you can easily spend that on a MacBook. I mean, it's crazy for that price point. I'm also really curious about their ability to deliver it. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's Blackwell based, right? And so
Right.
they've had significant issues with chip delivery, and obviously these are going to be the lower end versions of them, but it is interesting if they're able to meet the demand of this, which I presume is going to be relatively high. So that part I thought was an interesting little sidebar, given how restricted GPUs have been.
Mhm.
If this signals that they've caught up with capacity or what. So, it was interesting on a bunch of different fronts, and clearly is another signal and sign, perhaps of the beginning of the end for NVIDIA. And I say that tongue in cheek, but what I mean is you see this with all these big companies, is they've reached a point where the bread and butter isn't enough to sustain the growth rates that their multiples demand. And so therefore they rapidly start expanding into a bunch of other areas to try to cover their bases and find new areas to grow into. And this sort of strikes me as one, right? Not as, I mean, this is at least sticking to the knitting in terms of it's a chip or chip based, but that part I thought was interesting. But I think we're also seeing in some of the other announcements they made, as far as they're spreading their tentacles wide and deep to try to make sure they can continue to find new pathways to growth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is really smart if they can actually deliver. As you said, GPUs have definitely been a challenge from a supply chain perspective. And having an actual GPU in each one of these computers it seems like it's going to be extremely challenging if you're going to get, say, 100,000 of these out to every company under the sun that's going to want these. Because any $10 million company, frankly, is going to want one of these to have an idea of how all this works.